It's April of 1465. For over 20 years, George Castrioti, whom the world knows as Skanderbeg, has been holding at bay the greatest military power of his time, the Ottoman Empire. The mountains of Iberia have become a graveyard for the armies of Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. But war is a monster that evolves, and the Sultan has realized that to bring down the Lion of Albania, brute force alone isn't enough. He needs someone who thinks just like him. This time, the threat doesn't come from a foreign pasha ignorant of the Balkan pitfalls. The enemy shares the same blood as the defenders. His name is Balaban Badera, born a peasant in Albania, raised as a janissary at the Ottoman court. He's returned not just to fight, but to psychologically dismantle the resistance. What we're about to tell you isn't the account of a glorious victory, nor of a conventional military defeat. The Battle of Vaikal represents an open wound, a moment where tactical genius clashes with the bitterness of betrayal and loss. In that valley, Skanderbeg would win the clash with arms, but he'd pay a price that no gold could ever repay, the capture of his most loyal brothers in arms. Prepare to immerse yourself in one of the most dramatic pages of Skanderbeg's epic saga. This is the story of the Battle of Vaikal. It's the spring of 1465. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror, sits on the most powerful throne in the known world, but his gaze is clouded by rage. His armies have toppled the walls of Constantinople and bent the empire of Trebizond, yet a small patch of land in the western Balkans continues to humiliate the sublime Porte. Mehmed understands that the brute strength of his Anatolian pashas, accustomed to grand maneuvers in open fields, is useless amid the narrow gorges and impenetrable forests of Iberia. He needs a different weapon. He needs a man who doesn't look at those mountains with the fear of a stranger, but with the familiarity of a native. The choice falls on Balaban Badera. Appointed Sanjak Bey, military governor, of Ohrid, Balaban isn't an ethnic Turk. He was born a peasant right in Albania, in the Mat region, just a few days' march from Skanderbeg's fortress. Torn from his family as a child through the Devshirme, the blood tax that recruited Christian sons to become the Sultan's elite military, Balaban was forged in the fanaticism and iron discipline of the Janissary Corps. His rise is a masterpiece of Ottoman military meritocracy. He is the first general sent by the Sultan who doesn't need interpreters or local guides. He knows the language, understands the clan mentality, and above all, knows the guerrilla tactics that Skanderbeg has perfected. Balaban is the dark mirror of George Castrioti, both Albanians, both trained in Ottoman warfare, but divided by an irreconcilable faith and flag. Balaban's strategy for the 1465 campaign is subtle and poisonous. He doesn't assemble an immense and sluggish army that would take weeks to move and feed itself, but organizes an elite force, about 15,000 to 18,000 men, composed mainly of light cavalry, the Akinci, swift and deadly, and select units of heavy infantry. As he marches from Ohrid toward the Dibra region, Balaban begins an unprecedented psychological war. He sends expensive gifts, brocade robes, damascened weapons, and bags of gold, to Albanian nobles and commanders, exploiting the fatigue of 20 years of continuous war. The message is clear: submission brings wealth, resistance only death. Skanderbeg, from his eagle's nest in Cluj, immediately senses the shift in the wind. His spies, invisible eyes scattered along the Via Egnatia and mountain passes, report that this isn't the usual invasion army. The enemy moves too quickly, with an unsettling confidence. Castrioti understands that Balaban isn't coming just to fight, he's coming to hunt him. The Lion of Albania immediately mobilizes the League. He calls his most loyal followers, Tunush Thopia, Hamza Castrioti, despite his past ambiguities, and above all, Moisi Galami of Dibra, his right-hand man, a warrior of legendary strength who knows those lands better than anyone else. The Albanian army, numerically inferior with about 4,000 cavalry and a few thousand infantry, moves toward the Vaikal Valley, near present-day Balkans. It's terrain that Skanderbeg has chosen carefully, but this time, on the other side of the valley, there's a man who knows exactly how Skanderbeg thinks. The Vaikal Valley appears as a natural corridor, flanked by steep slopes and dense forests of beeches and pines, the ideal stage for the ambushes that have made Skanderbeg legendary. But George Castrioti knows that the classic playbook won't work against Balaban. The renegade expects deception. For this reason, Skanderbeg devises a two-level plan. He divides his army, strong with about 4,000 cavalry and 2,500 infantry. A small vanguard is positioned visibly in the center of the valley, like vulnerable bait, while the bulk of the forces, split into two wings commanded by himself and his lieutenants, hides in the thick vegetation on the mountain flanks. Balaban's army arrives at sunset, encamping with rigorous discipline. No unnecessary fires, doubled sentries. At dawn, the Ottoman war horns shatter the silence. Balaban, cautious, doesn't launch the entire army into a charge. He first sends the Akinci, the irregular light cavalry armed with composite bows and scimitars, to test the Albanian resistance and trigger any traps. The clash begins with sudden violence. Ottoman arrows darken the morning sky, bouncing off the plate and mail armor of Italian and Raguzan make worn by the Albanian heavy cavalry. Skanderbeg's vanguard, though outnumbered, holds the impact. They are hardened veterans, accustomed to fighting shoulder to shoulder. Balaban, seeing that the Albanians aren't yielding, commits the mistake Skanderbeg hoped for. He engages the bulk of his forces. He's convinced he's pinned the enemy. In that moment, a prearranged signal, perhaps the shrill sound of a trumpet or a fire lit on a hilltop, unleashes hell. From the lateral woods, Skanderbeg's cavalry pours into the valley like a flood. It's a devastating charge. The Albanian Stradioti cavalry, armed with long light lances and curved swords, strike the exposed flanks of the Ottoman formation. Skanderbeg himself is in the front line. Contemporary chronicles, like those of Marin Barlady, describe his physical presence as a force multiplier. Wherever his helmet topped with a goat's head appears, Ottoman morale crumbles. But the Battle of Vaikal has a particularly macabre note. Not only are there cries in Turkish and Arabic, but insults and orders shouted in the same Albanian dialect from both sides of the front. It's a miniature civil war. Soldiers who might have shared the same birth village now find themselves slitting each other's throats in the mud. The melee is brutal and chaotic. Despite the ferocity of Balaban's janissaries, Skanderbeg's tactical position is superior. The Ottoman formation, pressed on three sides and unable to maneuver in the narrow valley, begins to unravel. Balaban, realizing the pitched battle is lost, orders not a disorganized flight, but a strategic retreat. He abandons the field, leaving behind banners and wagons to slow the adversary. On the ground lie thousands of bodies, but for Skanderbeg, in that moment, the victory seems total. The enemy is en route. The adrenaline of triumph courses powerfully through the veins of his commanders. But it's precisely in this instant of euphoria that Balaban's poison is about to take effect. Victory on the battlefield is often more dangerous than defeat. The intoxication of success clouds prudence, and the feigned retreat is one of the oldest traps in Turkish warfare, a tactic inherited from the Central Asian steppes. Balaban Badera, beaten but not broken in spirit, is playing his last card as his troops withdraw toward the southeast. Skanderbeg, ever the cautious strategist, orders his men to halt. He knows that pursuing a routed enemy in rugged terrain can turn into a disaster. But the order doesn't reach everyone, or perhaps it's ignored in the heat of the moment. A select group of Albanian commanders, seeing the enemy's backs and feeling victory within grasp, launches into pursuit. These aren't common soldiers, they are the elite of Albanian warrior nobility, the pillars on which Skanderbeg has built his legend. Leading them all is Moisi Galami, the Lord of Dibra. An imposing warrior, famous for his physical strength and for having challenged and then begged forgiveness from Skanderbeg years earlier, Moisi rides with the fury of someone who wants to end the game forever. With him are 7 other high-ranking commanders, including Mazaka of Angelina, Skanderbeg's own nephew, and other valiant men like Vladan Jurica, Jin Mazaka, and Giovanni Perlat. Balaban has anticipated everything. He's not fleeing blindly, he's leading his pursuers into a snare. He allows the 8 commanders to isolate themselves from the main Albanian army, pushing too far ahead, blinded by dust and glory. In a narrow passage, far from Skanderbeg's watchful eyes, the trap springs. The Janissaries, who moments before seemed en route, suddenly turn. From the surrounding rocks emerge other Ottoman units held in reserve. Moisi and his companions find themselves surrounded by a wall of shields and spears. It's not a battle, it's a manhunt. Balaban's order is strict: take them alive. The Sultan doesn't want martyrs dead on the field, he wants living trophies. The resistance of the 8 commanders is fierce. Chronicles recount that Moisi Galami fought like a cornered lion, felling numerous enemies, but the numerical superiority is overwhelming. Horses are brought down, weapons wrenched from hands. One by one, Skanderbeg's best lieutenants are unhorsed, beaten, and chained. When Skanderbeg reaches the site of the clash with reinforcements, it's too late. He finds only dust and traces of blood. The enemy has vanished like smoke, carrying away the beating heart of the Albanian command. The victory at Vaikal instantly turns to ashes in George Castriotti's mouth. He has won the battle, routed the Ottoman army, but lost his brothers, his advisors, his family. Balaban Badera has failed the military objective, but achieved a devastating psychological success. He has shown that even the heroes of Iberia can bleed and end up in chains. The news of his lieutenant's capture strikes Skanderbeg harder than any physical wound endured in 20 years of campaigns. For George Castriotti, those men aren't mere subordinates. Moisi Galami is his sharpest sword, a man he had forgiven and welcomed back like a brother. Vladan Jurica is one of his most brilliant strategists, Mazaka of Angelina is blood of his blood. Without wasting a moment, Skanderbeg launches a frantic diplomatic effort. He immediately sends ambassadors to the Sublime Porte with an offer that would make any European monarch waver: thousands of Ottoman prisoners captured in previous campaigns, purebred horses, fine weapons, and a sum in Venetian ducats so vast it could arm a new army. The proposal reaches Mehmed II's hands. The conqueror, seated in the heart of the emerging Topkapi Palace, examines the list of ransoms. For a pragmatic sultan, acceptance would be logical: recover his own soldiers and fill the treasury coffers. But Mehmed isn't playing an economic game. He's waging a war for the soul of the Balkans. He sees in Moisi Galami and the others not prisoners of war, but supreme traitors. Moisi, in particular, had deserted to the Ottomans years before, only to return repentant to Skanderbeg's embrace. In the Sultan's eyes, this is a personal affront that can be washed away only with blood. The refusal is sharp, cold, and final. No gold, no exchange. What follows is one of the darkest pages in the history of the Ottoman-Albanian wars. In Constantinople, in a public square, perhaps the ancient Hippodrome, once a theater of past glories and now a stage for horrors, the martyrdom unfolds. Contemporary chronicles, including the detailed ones of Marin Barlady, report that the execution was designed to last as long as possible. No quick decapitation, the honor reserved for nobles. For 15 interminable days, Moisi Galami and his companions were subjected to unspeakable tortures. They were flayed alive, piece by piece, while the executioners offered them respite in exchange for renouncing their Christian faith and submitting to the Sultan. Legend and history blend here. It's said that none of the 8 commanders uttered a cry of submission. They died praying and cursing the tyrant, turning their execution into a final act of resistance that impressed even the Constantinople crowd. Their dismembered bodies were then thrown to the dogs, denying them even the last dignity of burial. When the news of his friend's atrocious end reaches Cluj, Skanderbeg retreats into a terrifying silence. It's said that the Lion of Albania, the man who had made 2 empires tremble, wept openly. But those tears dried quickly, giving way to blind fury. The Battle of Vaikal, therefore, ends with a bitter paradox. On the field, Skanderbeg has triumphed, scattering Balaban Badar's forces. But in the heart of the war, he has suffered an irreparable defeat. He has lost the generation of commanders who had supported him from the beginning of the rebellion. From that day forward, Skanderbeg's war would change its face. There would be no more room for mercy, ransoms, or chivalry. The death of Moisi and the others marks the start of the final, most desperate and bloodiest phase of the Albanian resistance. Vaikal wasn't just a battle, it was the day Albania lost its finest sons, and Skanderbeg lost a part of his soul.